Wick in Caithness was once famous for its herring fishing. It boasts a large harbour as well as a marina for pleasure craft, but in 1997 a mystery began to unfold when the body of a local man was found in the water. Kevin McLeod had much to look forward to. The 24-year-old was engaged to be married to Emma Sutherland, and the couple had just got the tenancy of a council house at Thistle Park on the south side of Wick. He worked at the Wester site near Wick for a subsea pipeline fabricator as a labourer, the place where his father Hugh also worked, although he was a qualified electrician. On the early evening of Friday 6 February 1997, Kevin had been at his new house putting up lights while his mum, June, cleaned the house, ready for the couple to move in their furniture. The pair returned to the family home at Nicholson Street, and while Kevin was in the shower, his mum took a call for him from his friend, Mark Fubister. Mark was in Carter's bar and asked if Kevin would like to join him for a game of pool. While talking with him, Kevin came out of the shower and his mum handed him the phone. The two chatted and Kevin agreed to meet up, even though he'd not been planning a night out. Mark said he'd pick him up. While Kevin waited, he took out money from his pocket and counted out the amount due to a neighbour who'd helped decorate his new home in Thistle Park, and asked his mum if she would nip round with it the next day to pay him, as he didn't want to get soaked. It was a wet and windy night. At around 10 o'clock, Mark appeared, and the two went off. It was the last time June saw her son alive. The next morning, June was surprised, but not overly worried, when she saw Kevin hadn't returned home. His bed hadn't been slept in when she checked. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of him, and both she and her husband began to get worried. 22-year-old Martin McLeod, the middle of three brothers, the other being 18-year-old Andrew, was used to staying up into the wee small hours, and when he surfaced that Saturday afternoon, he told his parents that Mark Fubister had phoned at 3 a.m. and asked if Kevin got home okay. The McLeods tried to find Mark and finally caught up with him at his brother's house at around 6 that evening. When they asked him where Kevin was, Mark put his head in his hands and said, "Oh no," then ran back into the house. Hugh and June returned home. Hugh phoned the local police station in case his son had been arrested, unlikely though it was, and it was then he reported him missing. Emma, meanwhile, was in Glasgow for a fitting for her wedding dress and called to speak to Kevin, but the McLeods didn't answer when her number came up on their phone, as they had no idea what to tell her. On Sunday, 8th February, police began their search. They quickly established that Kevin had been seen in the harbour area in the early hours of the Saturday morning, worst for wear from drinking, once by a local police officer in a car doing its rounds, and twice by the harbour night watchman, Richard Ewart. Both times he'd been slumped over near the harbour cafe, but when Ewart did his next round, Kevin was nowhere to be seen. Gary Connor, a local diver, was called in to check the harbour, and it was here Kevin's body was found at 11 o'clock that morning. The police went to inform Hugh and June that a body had been found, and they believed it was Kevin's. One peculiar thing that was noticed about Kevin was that the buttons on his jeans were undone, leading police to speculate he needed to urinate, had stood at the edge of the harbour to relieve himself, and had accidentally fallen in. The police didn't fully examine the body before it was sent to Regmore Hospital in Inverness for a post-mortem examination. They also didn't forensically examine the scene in and around where Kevin's body was found, which is also normal procedure with an unexplained death, nor did they do house-to-house inquiries. It also transpired the clothes Kevin was wearing that night have since been lost or disposed of and were never tested. As far as the police were concerned at the time, it was an open and shut case. That was until the post-mortem was carried out. Dr. Rosalind Rankin began the PM on Tuesday 10th February and soon discovered that there was more to this. Kevin had died as a result of drowning, but he had severe abdominal injuries that had no explanation. She felt they were consistent with an assault, so stopped what she was doing until a second pathologist, her colleague T.J. Palmer, could help her. As in suspicious deaths in Scotland, two are required to corroborate their findings. Dr. Rankin reported her findings to Wick Police, and in turn the Procurator Fiscal in Wick, Alistair MacDonald, was told. The case immediately became a murder inquiry. Wick-based Detective Sergeant Richard Martin headed up that inquiry. Within days, Martin concluded Kevin had fallen over the bollards at the harbour, sending Dr. Rankin images of them. The report from Regmore stated Kevin's spleen had been ruptured and he had injuries to his liver. He also had arterial tears, although his ribs were intact, and he had a blood alcohol level that was around twice the then drink-drive limit. The conclusion was that Kevin had drowned and had hit the bollards, causing the internal injuries. During their investigations, police did piece together Kevin's movements that night. He'd been in the waterfront nightclub where a brief altercation took place between Kevin and a work colleague, Craig Stenhouse, but it was believed to be brief, although it was alleged Stenhouse shoved Kevin and punched him in the face. However, the incident blew over quickly and ended amicably. Stenhouse wasn't questioned by police, but went in voluntarily and gave a statement in June 1997. Kevin's uncle, Alan McLeod, asked police if they'd interviewed local taxi drivers. They said they had, but this wasn't true, as he himself had spoken to one of them and he'd not been asked for a statement. By the summer, the McLeod family weren't happy with the way police had handled the case, and two Inverness-based detective inspectors, Peter Black and Angus Chisholm, were assigned to the now cold case. Door-to-door inquiries took place, and those questioned in the original investigation were questioned again. They discovered Kevin had been involved in a second altercation, the first having been with another work colleague, William Woods. The inspectors concluded Kevin had suffered the abdominal injuries from falling on the fishing boat Gunhilda at the harbour, and the bollard theory was discounted. In 1998, a fatal accident inquiry was held into the death of Kevin McLeod at Wick Sheriff Court before Sheriff Ian Cameron. Mark Fubister was called to give evidence and stated he remembered the altercations but had calmed his friend down, although he couldn't say which one. Then they'd both left the nightclub at 1:30 on the Saturday morning. They'd taken a taxi as there was a party in Loch Street, but when they got there decided against it and headed back into Wick Town Centre on foot. Fubister remembered talking to a taxi driver in Market Street while Kevin sat on a windowsill. Shortly after this, Kevin left, walking back towards the nightclub and the service bridge, which would have taken him home. Mark and a young woman got a taxi which passed that way some time later, but neither they nor the driver saw Kevin. At the end of the FIA, Sheriff Cameron summed up, stating the cause of Kevin's injuries couldn't be ascertained, and he was critical of the initial police inquiry. He was also highly critical of taxi driver Ronald Hutchison, who had claimed he'd seen Kevin bleeding in the town centre, which in fact was a complete fabrication, a lie that cost time and effort during the inquiry. In 2001, pathologist Dr. Nathaniel Carey looked at Kevin's case, and he was adamant that the bollard theory was not the cause of Kevin's injuries, but also concluded that no third party was involved in his death. He claimed the bruises on the abdomen matched those of Creel's on a fishing boat, the Aurora, but it's claimed the Aurora didn't have any Creels on board until after Kevin died. In the early 2000s, the Chief Constable of the then Central Scotland Police, Andrew Cameron, looked into the handling of the case by Northern Constabulary. In 2003, the report was complete, and he was highly critical of the Deputy Chief Constable, Keith Cullen, who he saw as trying to fob the family off on numerous occasions when they'd complained to him. Cullen retired before any disciplinary hearing could take place. In 2007, the McLeods received a copy of Cameron's report 4 years or so after his findings, but much of it was redacted due to data protection. In December 2007, Hugh and June McLeod received an apology from Ian Latimer, the Chief Constable of Northern Constabulary. In December 2022, the family received an apology from Scotland's Chief Legal Officer, the Lord Advocate, Dorothy Bain, for the way their son's case had been handled, and for them being let down by the authorities. In 2018, Merseyside police were brought in to review the case and cleared the police of any wrongdoing. They also believed it was highly unlikely Kevin was murdered, but couldn't discount he was pushed from the quayside by a person or persons unknown. They also couldn't discover any motive for murdering him. His family remain unconvinced that Kevin's death was an accident. Kevin was 5 feet 9 inches tall, with brown hair and brown eyes, and was clean-shaven. He had an athletic build, and at the time of his death was wearing blue denim jeans, a black sweatshirt with Levi, Levi, written on it, and black Caterpillar boots. If you have any information about this case, please contact Police Scotland on 101 or Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111.